What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Yala, your thrice weekly podcast where we talk about the hottest news with a touch of what, Terence?
Good old humor, man.
Good old humor, man.
Yeah.
But today, we're
Yes.
not going to be talking about news in particular.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about someone who's very newsworthy.
Yes, who's you'll be seeing a lot of on your social media feeds.
Yeah, or you may have seen a lot of already. Definitely in the next month could determine the fate of Singapore going forward. And we have him right in front of us. It is none other than presidential hopeful Mr. Ng Kok Song.
Welcome to the Yellow Butt Podcast, Mr.
Good morning. Good morning, viewers. Good morning, listeners.
Yes.
Good morning.
I'm so delighted to be with Harish and Terence this morning.
Oh, thank you for joining us.
No, we're super excited to have you because we've been seeing a lot of you on social media, and one of the things was like, wow, how much media is Mr. Ng doing now?
Yeah.
Like, how will he be able to squeeze time in for a tiny small podcast like ours, And that's something we were like, okay, let's just reach out to him and see what happens. And boom, like less than a week and a half later, we have you here in our studio.
It's going to be a pretty tight contest.
Yeah.
And I think the swing in this contest will be the younger generation of Singaporeans. So I don't want to miss out on any opportunity.
So was
to
there
engage.
something from the start that was very clear, or
Yes.
from the time?
It was very clear to me.
How was that clear? Were you already on social
Well,
media?
you
a
look
lot?
at the statistics,
Mm.
and it shows that the last time when we had the presidential election was back in 2011.
Yeah.
And that was Dr. Tony Tan became the president.
Yeah.
So fast forward, now it's 12 years later. So in the last 12 years, there's a new generation of voters
Yeah.
who are of the younger generation.
Yeah.
So it's very important for any presidential hopeful to reach out to this younger generation of voters. And particularly because when we are talking about issues such as the safeguarding of our reserves, it's a subject which is a bit complicated, not easy to understand, and therefore you need to explain this as clearly as possible. So that is why from the very beginning I decided that I must go out to engage the younger generation of Singaporeans.
So how has that felt? Anything about being on social media that you've been surprised by?
No, I always viewed social media as a very important channel of communication. But I think the messaging has got to be different in the sense that you don't have the luxury of reading long speeches. All right? You need to connect immediately with the audience. And therefore, your message must be clear. It must be short, and if possible, with a touch of humor.
Yes, very important.
Perfect place to come. Perfect place to come.
But just speaking about reaching out to the youth, right? The Gen Zs, young millennials, they sometimes get a bad rep from, older generations who say things like, oh, they're snowflakes, they don't know how to deal with the hardships and all that. What is your impression of, what do you feel for the next generation of Singaporeans? Do you feel the same way that they haven't had the hard knocks in life, or what do you think about them?
Every generation is different. So my generation cannot expect that the younger generation, have gone through the life circumstances. But these are real people. Young people are real people. All right, with their anxieties, with their fears, but also with their hopes and aspirations. So if you want to be a leader of a country, you have to tap into those fears, those aspirations, those hopes. See? And so I really think that whoever wants to lead the country must find a way to engage, to listen, and then to put forward your plans. What are your ideas?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, it's easy to say, but how do you put into practice the fact that the younger generation is the future of Singapore?
That's true.
So on that note, I know you said before that you have 3 ways that you want to help the youth.
Yes.
right? Reducing stress, developing self-confidence, and educating them on financial literacy.
Yes.
So, but I think why there's been so much talk about the role of the president, because as a layperson, I just know, okay, it has to do with the reserves, and that's why there's been a lot of focus. So when you have these three ways that you want, how do you plan to do that as president? Do you plan to give speeches about it, or so what's the plan there?
So I think we have to understand what the president can do
Yeah,
and what the president cannot do.
yeah,
But there's a relationship. You might be surprised between safeguarding the reserves and those three things that I mentioned. So I think that the president has a certain platform, just as you have a platform, a channel of communication. All right.
yeah.
So apart from the custodial roles of the president, he has to safeguard the reserves. He's got to be a check on the government. If the government wants to use our reserves, he has got to be a check on key appointments in the public sector. If he thinks that somebody is being appointed, and standards of integrity are compromised, he's got to say no. So those are very important, crucial custodial functions for the long-term security and welfare of Singapore. But in addition to that, the president is someone who should unify the country, right? Unify people of different political views, political affiliations, And that's why I spoke about the necessity in this presidential election for the candidate to be independent so that you can function as an effective check on the government. And secondly, so that you can unify people from different affiliations. But coming back to this thing about, what can I do in regard to those three things? So, helping younger generation to get relief from stress, for them to find inner peace and harmony. Well, I'm a living example of that. So you can only speak and teach and share from your own experience. So I have that. So simple thing like, I want to be the meditating president. Right? So people will say, why does the president meditate? How does he meditate? So that is important. It's an intangible contribution to the national welfare. And then secondly, about developing self-confidence. And I spoke about how important it is to have more Singaporeans, like the two of you, who have confidence in public speaking to the point that you can speak informally but clearly. Now, that is something which will really raise the effectiveness, you might say. It will also prepare, Singaporeans for leadership positions, because you must be able to communicate your ideas. You've got to be able to speak clearly, And so here I am, talking to the two of you and seemingly very confident in public speaking. But I learned this from a very young age in school, So I'm, again, an example. You don't have to speak perfect English, but just learn to speak clearly, project your voice, so that you are audible and clear, right? And then the last part about financial literacy, right? So I'm an example of that too, because I was very poor.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to have a good job. I saved some money. I learned to invest it properly, And so the president has got to be a living example of the things that he wants to champion, so that it's reality. It's not a theory.
I see.
So, I mean, I think thanks for talking a bit about your background, coming as a poor person growing up and sort of living that Singapore dream, right?
Yes.
To getting to a position in society where a lot of people respect you as well. So, on that note, there are people who ask about your real independence when you say you're independent, because you're someone who you have friends in very high places. You know, you've spoken about Ray Dalio and learning from him. You've meditated with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew himself. For some people, it's like these are levels of society that they will never be able to reach. You know, to talk to these people and all. And then they say, oh, how can he be truly independent if he's spent his life working for the public service and interacting and with all these people at that level?
Yeah.
How can you truly be independent from the government or
So
the establishment?
on the first part about my being able to be friend with Mr. Ray Dalio, the most well-known hedge fund manager in the world, how did I manage to go and interact with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew? I think every Singaporean has got that potential. All right, if I can do it from why can't you? All right, so don't say that he's out in the sky. I wasn't. You know, I live in a hut with mud on the floor. All right. So now coming back to this thing about independence of the president, people will say, to use the word, yeah lah. But right, you say you are independent, but you work in the government. All right. So allow me to help to explain and to educate the voting public. So we must be very careful when we use a term such as establishment. You are a member of the establishment. All right. And then secondly, public service. Civil service, all right? And then political service, political leadership. And then the last word, independence. Independence of what? Independent of what, all right? So first the word establishment. The word establishment is actually a very broad spectrum, right? So, for example, in the United States, as you all know, you studied at the University of Pennsylvania. Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are members of the establishment. They are the political aspect of the establishment. The business community, Wall Street, they are part of the establishment. All right? And then religious organizations, civic organizations, they are part of the establishment, And so I am a member of the establishment because I work in the civil service. That is part of the establishment. So is Mr. Tharman, clearly, because he's part of the political leadership of the establishment. So is Mr. George Goh. He was a member of the business community. And so is Mr. Tan Kin Lian. He worked in a government-related organization, or the NTUC income. All right? So establishment, all of us were members of the establishment. All right? Secondly, when it comes to civil service, public service, the problem in Singapore is that ever since we had independence from 1965, 58 years ago, we've only had one governing party, the People's Action Party. So much so that people just say the government is PAP, the civil service is PAP. That is not correct, because in other countries, political parties come and go, but the public administration remains. The public administration, the civil service, is the continuity. All right? It's the continuity of any country. In Singapore, we have good public administration. So the majority of people in the public service are not members of the PAP. In fact, a very small minority. So you mustn't think the two things go together. You got to, they're separate. Right? And then, political leadership, that's quite clear. I have never been a member of any political party. So I'm independent of the political party, of the governing party. So that's what independence means. To have worked in the public service and yet independent of the political party, of the governing party.
But do you think in any way that would kind of like influence certain decisions that you might make, or it might make you, like, there's a risk of being less objective? Because, for example, let's say me and Terence, we've been working together for a long time.
Yes.
In future, if I fuck up or if he does something that is wrong, there might be that friendship there, which can cloud my judgment.
Yes.
And you have been quite public about like how even when you decided to run, you call Mr. Tharman.
Yes.
So how are you planning to guard against that? And maybe an example would be like, let's say if you were president at this point, with all the recent scandals, that we have seen.
Yes.
You mentioned just now that the president should be a check on the integrity of our
Yes.
leaders. How would you have stepped in? How would you have acted? Is there anything you would have done to kind of calm the Singapore citizens down or to make that whole process smoother, or how would you have influenced it?
Well, you see, one of the reasons why I have come forward
Mm.
to stand for the presidency
Yeah.
is because Singapore cannot take for granted that we will always have good, honest government.
Mm.
We cannot take that for granted. And, some of the recent scandals, you might say,
Yeah.
highlights that risk,
Mm.
you see. And it is precisely because we cannot take good government for granted that our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, he was the one who proposed the idea of the elected president
Mm.
to be a check on the government
Mm.
in regard to two things: the safeguarding of the reserves,
Yeah.
and secondly, the integrity of the public service.
Yeah.
All right? Now, the safeguarding of the reserves. We're talking about savings which have been accumulated in the past.
Mm.
There's a saying in not only in Chinese tradition that wealth does not endure 3 generations.
Mm. Yeah.
You understand that,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
In other words, the first generation was poor, work hard, they save money.
Mm.
Second generation still remembers what it was like. They also work hard and they maintain the wealth. There's always a danger that in the third generation, they will squander the wealth, right?
Mm.
So we cannot assume that we will not have that situation, because if a government, in its attempt to court popularity,
Yeah.
Mm.
to win votes, say, if you vote me in, I will not raise GST. I will cut the GST.
Mm.
I will do this, I will do that. In no time, the reserves will be gone.
Mm.
All the savings that we've accumulated, which are essential for the survival of our country and a long-term security, it will be jeopardized. All right? So that's one thing. Second thing is key office holders, the integrity of the public service. All right? If you have the wrong people in charge, corrupt people, you will make good institutions bad because of bad people. Ultimately, it is the quality, it is the character of the people at those institutions. So those two are essential and very important powers of the president to be a check on the government. Now, see, all right, why am I in a good position to provide that check? In order to provide that check, you must be competent. You must understand how the system works. You must know the assumptions behind the reserves, for example. Unless you have the competence, how can you do a good job? Because you cannot make that judgment. How can you make a judgment of whether integrity has been compromised in appointments in the public sector? Well, I work in the public sector for 45 years. I know what it's like, what it takes to be a person of integrity and competence. So you have a situation where it's important to have whoever is the presidential candidate to have that competence born out of experience. And then the next thing is independence. Well, I've never been a member of the political party. So I spoke about, the other day, I spoke about how important it is, as in good corporate governance, internal auditor and external auditor. All right? Internal auditor is own self, check own self.
Yeah.
It can work, provided you've got good, capable people, But what if the CEO is corrupt? dare the internal auditor,
Mm.
Point out the corruption? No chance. So you need an external auditor whose responsibility is not to the management, whose responsibility is to the shareholders, all the shareholders. And in Singapore's context, the president's duty is not to the government, his duty is to the people of Singapore.
So just building on that a little bit, or at least going back a little bit, like if you see it as very important to have that check and balance in place, right? Why is it for you haven't considered entering politics, earlier in your career, going from as an MP from the ground up and then enacting change, or at least being a check within the system as well?
When I was working for 45 years, there was little risk of bad government. And I loved my job at the GIC. It was my dream job. I didn't expect, but when I went into it, I love it. And I feel that was the best way for me to contribute to Singapore, helping to invest our reserves properly, build up the reserves, help to build up the GIC as a highly respected global sovereign wealth fund. That was my calling. That was my passion. But now, having retired from the GIC 8 years ago, the circumstances have changed. I'm concerned for the future of Singapore. So even at this stage of my life, I want to step forward and continue to serve the country, hopefully now as the president.
So is it because, is one of the factors that you have recently seen that the integrity of our leaders is at risk? Because, you said when you were working, there was no risk. But now, do you look at it and you're like, okay, the times are challenging, there is a greater risk if good people are not in charge?
I sense that, as time goes by, nations rise and fall. Business organizations rise and fall. It's very, very difficult to sustain an extremely high standard of integrity for a very long period of time. All right? So there's always that risk. Here we are, 58 years of being an independent country. So it is very likely that at some point in time, standards will decay, and perhaps recent events have highlighted that risk. Even the Prime Minister has spoken about this publicly. He says, there have been several cases where we fell short. All right? Will it get worse? Maybe. It's a wake-up call for Singapore. It's a wake-up call for the political leadership. So that's why I felt that if not now, when? All right?
Yeah.
So I'm still, energetic. I'm still clear-minded. I still have that, that fervor in me that I do not want to see the reserves which I've helped to build up get squandered.
I see.
So, on that as well, people have also asked, if this presidential election, if you don't win this presidential election, how would you continue in serving Singaporeans in public service and all beyond? If it's not being the president, how else would you want to help Singapore?
Can start a podcast. Can start a podcast.
About financial literacy.
Yes, of course.
Meditation.
Yes, no. I think, you see, 8 years ago, when I retired from the GIC, I did a startup.
Yes, yeah.
Like you did, more than 10 years ago. I did a startup. And the startup was my investment company, Avenda Investment Management. Why? It was because when I retired, there were quite a number of organizations, endowments, foundations, family offices. Mr. Kok Song, can you come and help us to invest our money using your experience at the GIC? Come and chair our investment committee. So I said, there's only one, I'm only Kok Song, one person only. I cannot be on so many committees. So I said, I think a better idea would for me to start my own company. and you be my client,
Mm.
so that I can serve many clients at the same time and not just advise them how to invest their money. I will invest it for you.
Yeah.
And then deliver the results.
Mm.
So my ambition was to establish a homegrown Singaporean investment management company, so that Singapore can say we are a financial center. We also have our own BlackRock shoulders.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we have something like that if we want to be a financial center? So that was my to serve these clients who needed good investment advice and help to build up an indigenous Singaporean fund management company operating to global standards. So that was how I felt I could continue to serve Singapore, even after my retirement from the GIC. So if after the presidential elections I do not win, I will go back and take Avanda, because it's just been 8 years. It takes a long time to build a significant organization. And the other three things that I mentioned, teaching meditation, helping younger generation to develop public speaking skills, help them with financial literacy, I will continue to do that, regardless of whether I'm president or not the president.
Because I can imagine during those 45 years in GIC, you have experienced a lot. And so just to understand that a bit more, I know one thing that people keep talking about is like your independence. And I know I'm going back to something we went back. But I think one issue, maybe like even I feel, is like we hear that, but maybe you could, is there any time in GIC where you were at odds with policies set by the leaders that you kind of went against?
Yes.
Or how,
I mean, both of you studied at UPenn.
Yeah.
You probably took investment courses.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
So I can share with you that during the run-up to the 2008 global financial crisis, in 2007, in March 2007, I felt very uncomfortable with the state of the financial markets. I was so worried about the excessive leverage there was in the financial system, in the banking system. At that time, everything were looking very hunky-dory.
Yeah.
Markets were rising. Everybody was very optimistic about the future. But I took a different view. And when I took the different view, I had to go to the board of directors of the GIC. I had to go to an investment committee which not only comprises members of the board, but key luminaries from around the world. They were our financial advisors. I went to them and said, I would like to reduce the risk of the portfolio. Not in some small way, but in a significant way, to really de-risk the portfolio. There was considerable pushback. Pushback not only from my global financial advisors, which is what their job is, to challenge me.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
But also from members of the board. They said, Kok Song, why are you doing this? We are long-term investors. We shouldn't be market timers going in and out. I said, no, it is my responsibility, based on my experience, that there is more downside risk than upside potential. Given the highly leveraged state of the system and the exuberance there was.
Yeah.
So I had to battle my way through, but fortunately, at the end, the board agreed with my assessment. But it was a to and fro process where I had to stand firm. And if you know the investment business, that was a considerable career risk. Because if I de-risked the portfolio and the market went up, you were a short-term market timer. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, fortunately, I had the conviction, born from years of experience.
Mm.
Fortunately, I felt that if I make my case very strongly, I can persuade the board, which I was eventually able to do.
Mm.
So you need that steel in the spine
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
when it comes to crucial moments like this.
Mm.
And what is your mantra during times like that? Was your conviction so strong that you felt like I'm not going to be shaken, or is it something that you grapple with internally also?
Well, when you have a job to do,
Mm.
you do the best you can. By which I mean, I have to think through this very carefully,
Mm.
and say, how sure are you? In the investment business, you are never totally sure. It's a danger to be totally sure,
Mm.
right? But you have to make an assessment, and the assessment that I had to make was, what is the upside and what is the downside? All right?
Mm.
That's what calculated risk taking is all about,
Mm.
So I reached the conclusion, that the downside risk far outweighed the upside potential.
Mm. Mm.
And it's better to give up some gains than to lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So those are judgment calls.
Mm.
So fortunately, in those times, I was already meditating.
Mm.
Mm.
I meditate regularly, twice a day.
Mm.
And what meditation teaches us is, number one, to have a clarity of mind. Right?
Mm.
And the clarity of mind comes when you do not look at the world through the prism of your ego. Do not have preconceived notions. Don't be biased.
Mm.
Look at the evidence. Don't select the evidence that confirms your own bias.
Mm. Mm.
So our personal bias is the ego. We want to be right and we want to say, but don't be cocksure.
Mm.
All right. So meditation helps a lot in that. Helps you to look at the world, without being biased, by your preconceived notions. And then secondly, I came to the conclusion, yes, all right, you have made a judgment call. It seems to be the right one because you are more concerned about losing money than making money.
Mm.
That's quite clear that that's a sensible thing to do, right?
Mm.
Once you came to that conclusion, I said, I will now do my very best, if the board agrees, to execute this. And once you have done that, I have a peaceful sleep.
Mm. Mm.
Because sometimes the way things turn out is beyond your control.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's beyond your control. But as long as you have done the best you can go back and sleep.
Mm. Mm.
That is what we call detachment.
Mm.
Detachment.
Yeah.
To do the best you can, but to accept that sometimes things are beyond your control.
Mm.
Mm.
So that crisis was the first time I can remember where all my years of meditation helped me to see things clearly
Mm.
and then to be calm in the face of the storm.
And was
Because
that
I was detached.
the toughest pushback that you had to deal with?
It was.
Mm.
I mean, we're talking about considerable amounts of money, and if you're interested, let me share how challenging that period was.
Mm. Mm.
So go back to May 2007. The markets were rising.
Yeah.
So I took that view, and I remember having a discussion with Bob Rubin
Mm.
and Chuck Prince. Do you know them?
Chuck
Bob
Prince, the
Rubin.
CEO of
Citibank.
Citi, right? Yeah.
Mm.
He was the one who says, when the music is going on, we continue to dance.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right? I had a discussion. He says, Kok Song, we heard you, why are you so pessimistic?
Mm.
I say, I don't buy your argument that as long as the music is going on, we should continue to dance.
Mm.
Anyhow, I was able to persuade the board that it was a sensible thing to de-risk the portfolio. You know what happened? We started to de-risk the portfolio.
Mm.
The market went to a new high
Mm.
from May to October 2007.
Mm.
So it was very stressful for me. I was wrong in the short term.
Mm.
All right? Now, if you go through a period like this, it's very stressful.
Yeah.
Then gradually, things begin to weaken, and then in March 2008, Baston's collapse.
Yeah.
I said, aha,
There you go.
that is the beginning.
Mm.
So, still the markets were, not beginning to get nervous.
Yeah.
But I was feeling more comfortable that my judgment at last looks to be the right thing, but still not sure.
Mm. Yeah.
October 2008, Lehman collapse.
Mm. Yeah.
So after sweating for more than 1 year with a major decision which I had advocated,
Mm.
the markets collapsed, as you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
At that point, I went to the board and I told my management, it's time to buy.
Mm.
Buy back everything that we have sold.
Mm.
Now, yes, that is market timing. You don't do market timing all the time.
Yeah.
You reserve those big decisions for the right time.
Yeah.
But when is the right time?
Very true. No, I actually that whole period was like I was literally working on Wall Street in my short stint as an investment banker when everything was falling apart. So I think it's totally true. What you're saying is like how stressful it was.
Yeah.
For everyone in the financial community. Of course, for me, I was just worried that they would take away breakfast at the pantry because I was a low-level employee.
Did they take away breakfast?
They took away. I mean, the ski trips disappeared. The breakfast
Ski
disappeared.
trips.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, but really, just hearing from friends around who are all losing their jobs and all, I was like, wow,
Yes.
it's not a joke.
It was the mother of all financial crises.
Yeah.
All right. So all my life, I worked at a GIC. I realized it was a preparation for that crisis. So once that crisis was over, I said, time to retire.
But on that note, do you think that having worked for 45 years in one organization actually it doesn't give you the breadth of experience across multiple sectors?
You see, investments is the pinnacle of finance. Because in investments, you have to integrate several disciplines. It's not just economics. It's not just accounting. It's not just about finance, psychology, politics, risk-taking. It's the pinnacle where you have to integrate all these disciplines. All right? So in my job, I was able to have all these, learning all these disciplines. All right? And I enjoyed my job. I found that I have a risk-taking mentality, calculated risk-taking. I like to take risk, and I want to be measured. So investments gives you that. Take risk, calculated risk, and you are measured. You see, I like that. All right. But the one thing that drove me was I was doing this not for the shareholders of Goldman Sachs. I was doing it for the people of Singapore. If I do my job well, Singaporeans will benefit, present generation and future generation. Which is why, having helped to build up the reserves, I don't want the reserves to be squandered.
True. So, I mean, just talking a little bit, because we're talking about finance and how Singaporeans benefit from, building up the cash reserves and all. The president's role to unify the people of Singapore is, that's ultimately the most important thing, right?
Yes.
But in recent years or recent months, there's been this narrative of two Singapores where, because of income inequality and keeping up with global economy, we are starting to see, there are people who have a lot in Singapore and there are those who are struggling to get by. What is your plan or vision to try and, pull these two worlds together and unify them together?
I think, there is the rhetoric and there is the action. All right? And certainly you have to understand that in regard to the presidency, the president does not do what the government should do. Right? The president has got a veto, but the president does not initiate policies. You understand? There's a vital difference. If the president keeps on checking the government on any kind of thing, the government cannot function. It will be a big distraction. So the president's role is to work with the government for the people of Singapore. The two words are important, with and for. All right? Now, your question about, you might say, the disparity in living standards, in level of income and wealth. I think in Singapore, the situation could be likened to three escalators. Three escalators. The first escalator is the ultra-rich, including, foreigners who come and live in Singapore, enjoy our living conditions here, extremely wealthy, in many cases flaunting their wealth. Right? It's a good thing that we have these people here. They come and help to create jobs. They patronize our restaurants and things like that. Not a bad thing. All right? If you want to be a global city like London, you should expect to have these people.
Yeah.
But that's the fastest moving escalator. Then the second escalator we have is, you might say, the middle income. This escalator is moving not as fast as the first escalator, but still rising, moving upwards. And these are middle income. And then the third escalator, the low income, even the lower middle income, moving slower. Now, so I think the prosperity of Singapore and the long-term future of Singapore requires that all the three escalators should continue to move up. So everybody, the rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And we want that to happen. So we must be very clear that it is in Singapore's interest to grow the pie. The three escalators is how you divide the pie. It's a distribution issue. All right? Now, so tying back to the reserves. When you look at the reserves, they have the past reserves, the accumulated savings of the people of Singapore. And that can only be drawn down in times of crisis, in times of war, in times of crisis such as the pandemic, But there's also the investment returns on those past reserves. And every year, the government takes part of the investment returns into the budget. The Minister for Finance presents the budget. This is the expenditure. Here's the revenue. If you look at the revenue, sources of revenue, the largest component is the investment returns. The investment returns. So the investment returns is how the past reserves benefit present generations of Singaporeans. Because of the revenues that we take into the budget, it can finance healthcare expenditure, education expenditure, housing expenditure, GST vouchers, without us having to raise taxes by too much. You see, in other words, it prevents us from having deficits. All right? So I think that the big picture is we want to continue growing our reserves, and we grow our reserves best by having economic growth. When there's economic growth, the government is able to have more revenues, corporate tax, income tax, COEs, whatever it is. And when the reserves grow, we're able to use more and more investment returns for the budget. And if we have more investment returns for the budget, we can spend more on healthcare. We can spend more on helping the low income. You see, so people of Singapore have got to understand that at the end of the day, the reserves, the growth of the country must put Singaporeans first, especially the lower income Singaporeans. So this needs to be communicated and it needs to be seen in action. The president has got no power to tell the government, I want you to spend so much. The government has, in his wisdom, wisdom, because unless you take care of the lower income Singaporeans, you will not get their support for too long. So it is in the wisdom of the government to do what it can for lower income Singaporeans.
Sorry, carry on.
But as a country, we must be clear. We want to grow the economy. And having foreigners come to Singapore is what helps Singapore to be a successful economy. But the beneficiaries must first be Singaporeans. So there's Singapore and there are Singaporeans.
No, I do really like that analogy that you're putting up, that all the escalators are going up.
Yes.
So, and I think the rationalization and theory of it is very true. And it's important to communicate that to people.
Yes.
At the same time, if there's someone who's on that, lower middle escalator, and they are saying that, it's just moving too slowly. I don't even want to be part of this rat race. Do we really need to be escalating? Can't I just be, on the travelator moving forward? What will you say to someone like that who, he's just tired of rat race? And what will you say to this person to inspire him about the future of Singapore? Is it all about just moving from escalator to escalator, or what is it in the future for him?
I think it is essential for every Singaporean, especially the younger Singaporeans. Nobody owes you a living. That was the philosophy behind the early stages of development in Singapore. Nobody owes us a living. And secondly, for your own dignity, or own personal dignity, do something. Don't be lazy. Don't escape. Don't give up. For your own dignity. Right? Don't ask for handouts. Earn your own money. Because the reality is, there are plentiful job opportunities in Singapore. It's just that some people are too choosy. So when I was young, I had to struggle, right? I had to lift my family out of poverty. 5 brothers and 5 sisters. My father lost his job. I had to work so hard while I was studying in university to support the family. So we can make it. The opportunities are there, but we must be prepared to put in the work. And if you work, the government will supplement your income. That's why we have workfare, which I think is a great idea because it encourages you to work. But if your income level falls short of what is needed to survive, the government can top it up. So that is how the past reserves through the investment returns benefit us. So I think we need to have, I would say, a positive mindset that we have the opportunity in Singapore, but we ourselves must put in the effort. And that's what I hope to encourage, more Singaporeans to do. And of course, life can be quite challenging, Even people at a very young age, they get discouraged, they get stressed out, and part of the stress comes from not being able to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right?
Mm.
And partly this is attributable to, may I say, social media.
Mm.
All right?
Mm.
Creating the illusion that everybody is wonderful. All right? Everything, we're also famous.
Mm.
And everybody is trying to keep up.
Yeah.
So that's where you need to have ways of developing emotional resilience.
Mm.
And that's why I'm an advocate of meditation.
Mm.
All right? So that you don't feel that you have to conform, to comply, to act in a way that people will like you
Mm.
or your parents demand of you. You have to be yourself.
Mm.
Mm.
And I'm convinced that if you can be yourself, you will say, yes, I've got some limitations. Everybody's got limitations, but I have my potential.
Mm.
There are certain things that I can do, like the two of you. You went to business school, you came back, and this is my potential.
Mm. Mm.
And you are running a business which contributes to better communication.
Mm.
You're performing a service. All right? So I think every Singaporean must go deep within themselves. What is my gift? What is my talent? What can I do?
Mm.
Everybody has got an ability. Find that ability
Mm. Mm.
and then use the most of that ability. Then I think you'll be happy
Mm.
because you feel that you are able to do some kind of work which brings out the best in you.
Mm.
Do you think there are less and less people who are being that self-reflective?
I sense that.
Mm.
I sense that, and that's why you have this syndrome of giving up,
Quiet
life
quitting.
flat.
Yeah,
Quiet
quiet
quitting.
quitting. Yeah.
You see, it's discouragement.
Mm.
It's discouragement. Mhm. So I think, and it's a waste.
Mm.
Mm.
It's a waste of the gift of life.
So
You are given a life. Make the best of it.
So then, I mean, it's refreshing to hear that coming from someone who's hoping to be president. Do you feel like in the past few years that message hasn't been coming across from the leaders of Singapore? Because like what Terence said, right? I find there's a lot of focus now on like, okay, we need to keep aiming more growth, this growth that, and you can totally understand the need for growth, but sometimes putting it in the context of why we owe it to ourselves to push ourselves, that doesn't come across in messaging, and it's almost like the comms that we get from the leaders.
Yes.
And of course we understand the leaders, they have a lot of stuff to do, but the communication sometimes feels like there's a disconnect.
Too much emphasis on the need for growth,
Mm.
not enough emphasis on how we share the fruits of growth.
So that's something you have felt yourself?
Yes.
Mm. Mm.
And that's very important because if you want the whole of Singapore to be behind you, that we all want to grow the pie.
Yeah.
People want to say, are we getting a proper share of the pie? So I don't think as a citizen,
Yeah.
I would like to see more. And that's where and this is it's a worldwide phenomenon. That's why you have a situation in the United States where Trump came to power and he started with the message, America first.
Yeah.
But sadly, it descended into America only. I think Singapore, we should have the motto of Singapore first, but we should never say Singapore only because Singapore depends on the rest of the world for us to grow. Singapore first is extremely important.
Yeah. And just now you mentioned that the role of the president is to work with the government for the people.
Yes.
But in the past few minutes, you have also said that you have sensed certain things like maybe the communication, the focus on how we share the pie is not that ideal. So in some way, it sounds like okay, there are things you think can be done better.
Yes.
So let's say if you do have a conflict with certain actions the government is taking, what is your plan of action going to be like? Talking to them like you did with the board of directors when you were at GIC in 2007, or more publicly taking a stand?
No, the under the present dispensation,
Yeah.
under the constitution, as I said, the president cannot initiate policies. All right.
Yeah.
The president has got the veto in regard to the use of past reserves and appointments.
Yeah, appointments
to the public service.
Yeah.
So he should stay within his lane. All right. Now, so we should make a distinction between power and influence. All right. Now, influence is best exerted quietly. So I think it would not be a satisfactory situation for the president to say, I'm going to make trouble for the government. All right. I'm going to keep on putting pressure on the government. That is not the role of the president as currently defined in the Constitution. But it does not mean that the president is toothless. All right? The president has got teeth that can bite and should bite when it comes to the safeguarding of the reserves and the appointment of key public appointments. All right? But on the other issues, I think it's really about influence, and I have some optimism that ultimately a government which wants to stay in power will have the wisdom to make adjustments. But that's for the government to do.
So the president is like the chief influencer, kind of.
Chief influencer in the government.
You influence behind the scenes and all that, right?
But then, one thing that we have also from, doing a lot of content around news and reading chatter online, one big issue is the lack of transparency. And
Yes.
while I understand that we shouldn't be privy to everything that leaders discuss behind closed doors, how then do you plan to address, if the influence is going to be exerted quietly, to address the sentiment that, okay, there's no more transparency? Because you might get the influence, you might exert the influence you want, but to us, we don't know what's happening, So is there anything you would like to tell people who have that concern that, okay, it's going to be more closed door discussions, and it again is the problem of no transparency?
I think that there are two issues here. And you got to make a distinction between accountability and transparency. Everybody should be accountable. All right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we have parliament, we have the presidency, we've got the government, and we have the people of Singapore.
Yeah.
All right? So there must be accountability. You cannot say no accountability. All right? It is the essence of a democracy that there is accountability. All right? Now, and it's true that accountability comes with a certain level of transparency.
Yeah.
But we must be very clear as well that there are certain things where it's not in the national interest to be transparent. And I'm referring here specifically to the size of our total reserves. So people keep asking, why can't you tell us how much money we have? It seems a reasonable request. Until you say, what are the reserves for? The reserves is part of our total defense in times of war. You don't tell a potential enemy what weapons you have. Because the reserves is how we can buy global support, buy weapons, buy software nowadays. All right? In times of war. It's our war chest. Secondly, the reserves is what fosters confidence in the Singapore dollar, which is why the Singapore dollar is as strong as it is. as you all know, in the financial markets, from time to time, speculators might challenge that. And I found that in 1985, when I was working in the MAS and I was in charge of foreign exchange market operations. And I had to see off the speculators.
Mm.
And when you have to see off the speculators because they want to undermine your currency, they should know who they are up against.
Mm.
So that's another instant, a financial war. So once we are clear about these reserves being of strategic importance to Singapore,
Mm.
it is not in the national interest to say how much reserves we have, because we have potentially hostile forces. Right? So I think I think a more educated, a more demanding electorate will demand more and more transparency, and the government should carefully draw the line. What is really so critical that we cannot divulge? These are our national secrets. Apart from that, what can we share with the people of Singapore? I think it is very important to do that, because if we don't do that, there's going to be more and more cynicism, less trust.
So do you sometimes feel that the current netizens or people on the internet can be too demanding?
They need to be. You need to explain to them. You need to explain to them, and some people will never be convinced because they are just. There's a saying, you cannot persuade somebody about your point of view when it's in their vested interest to have an opposite point of view. But I don't think the vast majority of Singaporeans are like that. If the government makes a greater effort to explain, I think it will go a long way to reduce the cynicism, the lack of trust in government.
So just now you mentioned that certain things that people shouldn't be privy to because it's our total defense, right? And a few times also you mentioned certain parts about how Singapore reserves are super important because you don't want to let your potential enemy know what our reserves are. So do you generally see the global climate as like somewhat adversarial or trending towards that, as opposed to the whole world, we are one, we are together, kumbaya? Or you feel now it's more every nation for themselves?
No, I you see, we should not get overly pessimistic. I think we should always be prepared for major risks that threaten us. Be prepared. It's part of good long-term strategic planning. But at the same time, we must be mindful that if we can unite as a country, if we can keep the favorable factors behind Singapore's growth going, there's huge potential for us as an economy. Because even despite the geopolitical, uncertainties and risks, Singapore is benefiting from it. Right? So we find ourselves in a unique position whereby we are able to be a place of refuge. A place of refuge for global companies who want to do business in Asia. And that's what money is coming in, people are coming in. We should make the best of it, Then we try to mitigate the downside by distribution, Singapore first, So I want to be able to, inspire the younger generation. Don't be despondent. The best of Singapore is yet to come. But we must know what are the factors behind our success, And there are three factors. I speak about the three treasures of Singapore that I want to help safeguard. Number one, our financial treasure, the reserves. Our social treasure, the unity of the people. Singapore as one. all standing up for Singapore. And the third treasure, good government administration. Singapore works. People want to come and do business here. See, if we can preserve, enhance those treasures, we have a lot of opportunities. And I spoke about this as somebody from finance. When I first started working in the 1970s, Singapore was nowhere in the world as a financial center. When the markets closed in New York, everybody waits for London. Today is different. Singapore is the third busiest foreign exchange market in the world. I helped to develop that. Singapore started the first financial futures exchange. I founded that. It is now the derivatives arm of the Singapore Exchange. It puts Singapore on the map. We trade the Nikkei contract with Taiwanese contract. And then we are becoming a very important wealth management hub. I helped do that. I set up the Wealth Management Institute. It has trained thousands of Singaporeans. So this is an illustration of what we can be. And I think if we play our cards right, my dream is that Singapore will overtake London to become the second most important financial center in the world. So I think we should inspire hope and optimism. Say, how do we organize ourselves as a nation to exploit the opportunities?
And that's why your tagline is United for our future.
For our future. United for our future.
Did you ever think of the tagline like, don't be cocksure, be Kok Song?
That's too,
That fell flat.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to say that for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
already.
but not nice to say.
That's true. But yeah, I mean, like, thank you so much for sharing. We normally end off every podcast with one Shiok Thing.
Very optimistic thing.
Very
as well.
optimistic one Shiok Thing.
Yeah.
Which is like what we mentioned. I mean, we say at the end of every podcast, it's just something you can share with the listeners. Could be an article, could be a video, could be a song that you have listened to. So we will go first. So you have a bit of time to think.
Yeah.
Terrence, you got a one Shiok Thing?
Yes, I have it's a YouTube video by the channel Tech Alter. They do analysis of like the major tech firms and what consumer tech firms especially, and what they do and what the strategies are. So one of their latest videos is about Elon Musk's rebranding of Twitter to X and into a super app. And I found it very interesting because he really goes into the geographic peculiarities of places like China, why super apps like WeChat and can work in China, why local services apps like Grab and Gojek and all can work in countries in Southeast Asia, but why none of them have worked in the US. And that's why Twitter or X is going to have a very hard time trying to become that super app for the West. So it's I think I never thought of it that way. Where I just thought the app sucks and that's why nobody knows using. But it's really there are geographical and cultural differences that enable these apps to work or fail in each of these countries. So very, very illuminating for everyone's just like ragging. They're ragging on Elon Musk for trying and all that, but it's interesting.
And what's the channel name?
Tech Alter.
Tech Alter. I see.
And you?
Cool. Mine is I've only recently started watching the show The Last of Us on HBO. Have you heard of the show?
No.
It's a series that came out earlier this year that was adapted from a game, and it got a lot of rave reviews, and I've taken quite a while to watch it. It's set like 20 years after a zombie outbreak, and it's about a group of people just surviving with quarantine zones and all. And I totally can see why the show got all the rave reviews. I finished the third episode, which was one of the best episodes of written television I've ever seen. And if you haven't started watching it, I know for you, probably till September 1st, you'll be very busy. Or at least even after that, busy. Yeah. So if you have time, if anyone has time and you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend it.
Right.
Yeah. And then what about yourself?
How about you?
I've been a great fan of Leonard Cohen. And I've been very inspired by Leonard Cohen over the years. And there's one song and one phrase which constantly rings in my mind, and it comes from this song called Anthem. Anthem. And the particular phrase that I love very, very much, because it is about inspiration. And it goes like this. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light comes in. Ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. Do what you can. No need to be perfect. If the bell can ring it. It's a message to all Singaporeans. You can do something. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's a crack in everything. Nothing is perfect. You will make mistakes. That's how the light comes in. If you are perfect, there's no room for improvement. Mistakes plus reflection equals progress. Those 4 lines, very, very meaningful to me.
And it's from a song, you said?
It's called a song called Anthem.
Anthem by Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen.
Wow, that is awesome.
Is it going to be your walkout music at whenever you make appearances as a presidential hopeful?
No, it's a very deeply reflective song because Leonard Cohen encountered many life challenges. He never gave up. He inspired, all his fans.
And like what you said,
wounded. He was wounded many times, emotionally wounded. He picked himself up. He never gave up.
And like what you said, that's what you hope to do as well as presidential hopeful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, thank you so much for answering our questions. All the best for your campaign. I think we had a lot of questions we wanted to ask. I asked everything I wanted to ask.
Yeah. I think we covered a lot of ground, really delving deep into your background and what you aspire for as a president.
Yeah,
this time,
and these were also some questions we got from our listeners, so I'm sure they'll be happy as well.
I'm so delighted. Thank you. I mean, the two of you were superb.
Oh, thank you so much, man.
Conversationalists.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
It wasn't stilted like most other conversations. So
that's what we're going for. Yeah. Well, but you were great. You were a great guest as well, and like this could carry on for 2 more hours.
Yeah, but hopefully in future we will have you back again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Regardless.
Yeah. Regardless. Yeah. We would love to have you.
Yes.
And if you want to start your own podcast, we will more than willingly help you.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Haresh.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng, or Kok Song.
Kok Song.
Thank you so much.
Good to end on Kok Song.
Good to end on Kok Song.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening and watching.